Welcome to Last Call with Jamion Christian. Our guest today, Jamy Bechler. Jamy, how you doing?
Man, I'm doing well, Coach. Appreciate you having me on the show. It's going to be a fun time. I look forward to talking with you on the show.
I've been so excited about this. You know, you're one of the people I started following on social media. I love the positive energy that you put out there, but I also love the coaching points. And so it's like so positive, and it just made me say, all right, let me follow this person for several months. And then at some point I was like, I have to get you on the show so you can share with our guests.
I appreciate that. You're not going to know who I voted for. You're not going to know what my favorite food is or my favorite team. I try to stay in my lane, and I'm not, I have a hard enough time doing that. But we try to put out positivity stuff that'll help athletes and coaches and leaders out there. And so we try to do that. And, I know social media gets a bad rap sometimes, but I, just like I when I work with student athletes or even coaches, I'll tell them, hey, everything can be used for good. Everything's a tool. What are you going to use it for? How are you, especially with student athletes? And I know you didn't ask this question, but student athletes all the time, they're putting out their brand, or they're putting out a message, or we all are putting out a story. We're weaving this story. What story are we telling the world? And in social media, we get to have a press conference every day. And so I decided early on that I wanted my press conference to be positive, that tries to help other people and be the change you want to see in the world. If you think there's a lot of negativity and you want the world to be more positive, then start with you.
Yeah. And you have a great background, as a athlete, as a coach. What makes you, as you step away from the coaching part of it, what made you want to jump into athlete, coach, athletic director? I mean, you've had a lot of lives within sport. What made you want to jump into this thought leadership and bringing others along?
I was influenced heavily by John Maxwell. He's written like 1.7 kajillion books. I think he'll write 2 books while we're on this interview here. He writes a lot of books, but I was influenced him growing up. I was a young athlete, then, in college, then a young coach. And I just got onto John Maxwell books early on. And then I had the opportunity to be trained by he and his teaching staff and become a John Maxwell certified leadership coach 5-6 years ago. And that really opened my eyes to the fact that you could do this for a living, or you could do this full time. You could do this and impact a lot of people. Because to me, the only people that I thought were speakers were people that were, for me, like a Bobby Bowden or a Dean Smith or a Mike Krzyzewski, famous coaches. They were the only ones speaking, or then the Tony Robbins, the guys or the gals that were just major big time and major motivational speakers. I didn't think that there was room for, somebody that maybe wasn't as well known. And that opened my eyes going through that training that, there's a need for all kinds of people with all kinds of different messages. We always tried to do leadership stuff. We always tried to help make the student athletes better. But I realized, there may be a bigger platform out there. We might be able to impact more people than just the 15 young ladies or young men on my team. Not that that's not important at all, but I just saw that there was something else out there that I might be able to jump into. And so I did. I jumped in, went all in, jumped into the deep end, and started my own business about 5 years ago, leadership consulting. So, I either have a very demanding boss or a lazy employee, depending on the day, when you're self-employed, or you're self-employed, unemployed, depending on the day also. But it's been fun getting to work with lots of sports teams and help lots and lots and lots of people. At least hopefully we're making a difference.
You've also created your own leadership playbook. My assumption is when you go out and work with teams, you kind of use this as your navigation. Would you say that's fair? What inspired you to build this leadership playbook? What are your favorite parts about being able to deliver it? And what kind of feedback do you get after being in attendance?
Yeah, the leadershipplaybook.com is our philosophy on leadership, and is broken up into a number of different chapters or modules or subjects or topics, however you want to look at it. But there might be a section on verbal leadership. And then within that verbal leadership section, there's a number of different lessons. And each of the lessons are 2 minutes long. So 2-minute video lessons on different things. So we might have a subject about teamwork, a subject about positional leaders or being a captain. And then those are broken down in a bunch of different leadership lessons so that your athletes can watch them just 2 minutes at a time on their tablet, on their phone. But what we want to do was 2 things. One is have a valuable resource, a valuable tool that teams could use that's inexpensive. So your team would sign up, become a member of the leadershipplaybook.com, and you would have access to all this stuff, a vault of information, but it's laid out. So you could just go through in order, this lesson, this lesson, this lesson, or you could pick and choose based upon where your team is at. Maybe your team is more advanced, so maybe you start farther down. But there's all these lessons, hundreds of lessons for your athletes to watch. But the other part of it is, a lot of times I will go in and speak to a team, or I will speak to an athletic department, and I'm the guy that checks off a box. I'm that guy that comes in August because your athletic department or your school needs someone to speak to the team or speak to the coaches to start off. I'm that guy sometimes, but then there's not follow-up. And Coach, you've been through a lot of these sessions. Probably people listening to this have been through those sessions where this guy or gal comes in, talks, and it's great. You feel good for that day. You checked off that box. Well, I wanted something that could be a follow-up. So this is something also that if I come in and speak to your team, now all of a sudden you could have this to follow up on the very things that I just talked about. So it's not just something we did in August, it's something we're constantly doing. So it's ongoing coaching just from an online standpoint. So we put this in place a couple of years ago. Unfortunately, it wasn't in place before the lockdowns. That would have been really nice. As all these student athletes, are sitting at home, it would have been great if this was up for that. I'd kind of dragged my heels, and then all of a sudden the world shuts down and I'm like, oh man, I wish I had not dragged my heels and procrastinated. I wish I had this out there to help people. But it's been going for a couple of years. We're continuing to add on. And actually this summer, we're going to do a major renovation of it, major update of it. So it'll be even better. But we're, one of the things that I think is good about it, and obviously I'm biased, but we also have lessons for coaches as well. We have a whole section for coaches. So most programs out there only work with coaches or only work with the student athletes. We wanted it to be combined and merged, where both coaches and athletes are getting are able to use it, because we think that it's a team effort. It's a team effort to have teamwork, to have a great culture. Oftentimes I will go in, Coach, you might bring me in to work with your team, and you're like, hey, this team is just not good. This team is selfish. This team is fix this team. Or you could translate that into business. Fix these employees. They're doing this, this, and this. They shouldn't be. Well, if I just work with the players, if I just work with the employees, but not the supervisors, the managers, or the coaches, well, they're gonna lag behind. They're not gonna be on the same page. And so it's very important to work with everybody in your program, everybody in your organization, so that everybody's on the same page and hearing the same message. And so that's one of the things we do with the leadershipplaybook.com is to get everybody on the same page.
Yeah, I love that, because, as you've coached, you've been involved in it, you've been a speaker, you realize so much of it is just about follow-up, right? You mean, you and I have both had a chance to recruit and try to network, and all of everything you say when you how can you be a good recruiter? How can you be a good networker? Everyone always says, follow up. And then when we go into these practices, rarely do they have a follow-up skill or follow-up place where you can go to continue to get more information. You end up going back to your notes, which may or may not have the new questions that you have available. And then that person's sort of a distant memory. So the ability to have a place to go after you speak, after you meet, after you connect is super valuable, that you have for as long as you can utilize it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we wanted to have something that, all right, if Coach, you can't bring me in, or you can't utilize our services, it doesn't fit in your schedule, well, you can still do this online program, and you can do it flexibility. And we have coaches and athletic directors all across the country that are doing it in different ways. Some are saying, all right, you're going to watch a 2-minute video before the next practice. So every day you're watching a 2-minute video as an athlete. You're watching it before you come to practice. Then when you come to practice, we're going to discuss it for 10 minutes. So let's say you do that for 5 days. That's 5 times 2 of watching. That's 10 minutes plus the 10 minutes each day. That's 1 hour a week that you're utilizing leadership, teamwork. You're hearing a different voice, or your athletes are hearing a different voice than just yours as the coach. You're getting maybe you're seeing teamwork in a slightly different angle. Coaches always say, hey, we just got to work together. We got to come together. We got to be unselfish, and they're repeating their talking points. But maybe you can have this guy that nobody knows named Jamy Bechler come in virtually or online and is telling you a story about Harriet Tubman, telling you a story about Tom Brady, telling you a story about so-and-so athlete, Steph Curry, and weaving that in, and that story then triggers something in your mind about, oh, now it makes sense to me what coach was saying. So it's just me saying things differently than your coach might, but it's all getting at the same point of having a better culture, a better leadership, better teammates on your team. And so, yeah, we try to provide coaches and ADs that tool. But people are using it in lots of different ways. Some of them are only using it for their captains. Some are using it for their whole team. Some are repeating it, repeating it each year. Some are repeating the lessons even. Hey, we're going to stick to one lesson a week, a 2-minute lesson, and we're just going to do a deep dive into that lesson. And every day we're going to talk about something different with that lesson. And each lesson comes with 5, 6, 7 discussion questions. So you don't even have to recreate the wheel. So if you're a brand new coach, you don't even have to be like, oh, what am I going to say about this lesson? We've got you covered. We've already come up with discussion questions that you can ask.
Oh, I love it. I love everything about it. Knowing what you know now, if you went back into coaching, what would you do differently and why?
Yeah, that's probably the easiest, or it's the easiest answer I have, but it would be hard to do. And that's make it not about me. It's not about me as a coach. And early on, I was 27 years old when I got my first head coaching job at the NCAA level. 27 years old. I had done everything possible in those 6 years previously as an assistant coach to become a head coach. I was a Siamese twin to all my head coaches. I did everything possible to prepare to be a head coach. You can probably appreciate this. Some of the people listening to this can appreciate it. In 6 years as an assistant, I made $36,000. Not average $36,000. I made $36,000 in my first 6 years as being a college head coach back in the late 90s. It was, I did everything possible, but why I'm saying that is because when I became a head coach, I was all about leadership, but I was going to teach how to be a leader. I was going to teach you to be a great leader, and you're going to follow what I'm doing. You're going to do what I'm telling you to do because I know how to make you a better leader. But it was still all about, I know better. You're going to do what I want you to do. And I'm always trying to prove that I belong. I'm trying to prove that, hey, they hired me for a reason. Trust me. And so what I was always trying to do was get followers. I was trying to get people to follow what I was saying because I thought that I was right. And whether I was right or wrong, it didn't matter. But I thought I was right, but I was going about it completely in the wrong way, and people weren't following me. I was in it for me. I was trying to prove that I belong, number one. But if our program won this sportsmanship award, or if our program had quote unquote these leaders, then that reflected well on me. It looked like I ran a disciplined program. I ran a tight ship. But even though I was trying to preach leadership, it was all about me still. I wanted me to look good. I wanted to get the raise, or I wanted to get the next job because, man, my program, it looked like I was in control because I'm this young kid trying to prove I belong. And so it took me, after 4 years of being a head coach, they allowed me to take my talents elsewhere. And, most coaches listen to this have been resigned, or their contract's not been renewed, or they've been fired at some point. So
Lord knows I've been there.
Yeah. Yeah. You understand. I mean, it happens, but that was a wake up call for me. And that made me such a better coach later on, because I realized, you know what, it was all about me. Even though I was preaching leadership, I was talking about it all the time. I really wasn't leading in a servant manner. I wasn't making it about the athletes and how they could become better people. I was making it about me and how I could look better using them almost as pawns to a degree. And I hate to say that because it makes it sound like I was so devious or I was so bad, but I was not leading the way I should. I wasn't being the servant leader I should. I was trying to get followers as opposed to trying to make other leaders, trying to make them, it be about them, trying to get them to have ownership in the program. It's not about coaches' plays. It's not about coaches' decision. It's not even about coaches' decision to do fundraising or community service. It's about our decision. It's about where we are going together. And too oftentimes it was me, you're messing up my plays. My plays are going to work. Trust me, they work. They work for Pat Summitt. They work for Tom Izzo. So if they're not working for us, it's because you're screwing it up. well, maybe I'm not focusing on, hey, Chris and Jawan, they don't get along, or Jalen and Ray, they don't trust one another, or maybe Chris and Jawan trust each other, but they don't trust me. And so I was looking at it just from a pure X's and O's standpoint of, hey, we got these great plays. Hey, I've got these great practice plans. I know what should work. Well, yeah, I know what should work, but I wasn't enveloping any trust with them. They weren't trusting me. They didn't Not only did they not buy into me, but I didn't allow them to invest in it and take ownership in it. It was all about compliance. Do what I tell you to do because I know better than you.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, I think that's a mistake that many of us coaches have made, many leaders have made. And so hearing that, I mean, I think we've all been in that phase at some point in our life because, the truth of it is, like, you're growing as a leader all the time. I always say you either coach how you were coached or you coach how you wanted to be coached. And having that distinction is really important, but it doesn't always come when you're, an assistant or when you're the fifth-year head coach. It kind of you come to that point of reckoning kind of through trial and error.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're able to relate to people that are trying. I'm trying to grow my team. I'm trying to make my team better. And, but their intention is in the right direction, but how they're going about it is not giving them, not allowing an environment to grow for the people that they're trying to serve.
Yeah. I wrote an article earlier this year or last year, 2022, that I think it was like 7 things that I've changed my mind about as a coach, things that maybe I came into coaching and I had this idea about, and I kind of changed my way of thinking. And I think as coaches, you hit it right on the head, saying we either coach kind of the way we were coached or the way we want to coach or want to be coached. But sometimes we forget we need to coach the way that these athletes need or want to be coached, and need and want are different. Yeah. Certainly sometimes. And sometimes we will say, well, they don't even know what they don't even know what they want. They need someone to be hard on them. Well, they might need somebody to be hard on them to a degree, but that hardness that tough love may not look the way it looked when back in the 80s and 90s when we played. That toughness, that tough love might look differently today than it did 10 or 15 years ago. But regardless, that tough love, let's say, if we don't have a strong bond, there's no way we can have a tough conversation with someone. We've got to have that bond, that connection with someone that doesn't break easily when we have that difficult conversation. But we as coaches try to have a difficult conversation without having, a strong bond. We haven't deposited into the emotional bank account to most of our athletes, and certainly not to their parents. But yet we want to have a difficult conversation with them. Well, we have nothing to pull out of that emotional bank account. We haven't built up anything. We haven't built up trust with the parents. We haven't built up trust with the athletes because, well, this athlete is an idiot, or this athlete is soft, or this athlete isn't committed, or this athlete doesn't care, or this athlete, XYZ, fill in the blank. It doesn't matter. But instead of us trying to figure out, all right, what makes, Jalen tick? What makes Chris tick? How can I inspire him as opposed to sitting back and saying, well, he's just not doing whatever. Why should we expect a 16-year-old, or if you're at the college level, why should we expect a 21-year-old to have it figured out and be the mature one? Why should we expect them to come to practice every day and to be focused and intense and unselfish for 2 full hours of boring practice? Why should we expect a 16-year-old to do that? But we do that. They got like 7-second attention spans, and maybe we're the coach that just threw together a practice plan at the last minute because we got really busy, or we're doing the same thing over and over again. Why should we expect them to be focused and attentive? And oftentimes we put so much on our student athletes and so many expectations on them. They're not us. And we've got to walk them through that. And we've got to be patient with them, and we've got to help them. And at the end of the day, we got to figure out how to inspire them. Don't rely on a 16-year-old to motivate themselves. I don't care if you were a motivated 16-year-old, you're not them. You've got to figure out what makes each of your athletes tick and how to get the most out of them. And we as coaches sometimes don't do that. We think that we have these high expectations, and that goes into captains too. We have such high expectations that our captain should be an extension of us. Well, that'd be nice, but they're still 16-year-olds. There's not a lot of Tim Tebow's and Derek Jeters and Michael Jordans running around.
Yeah.
Most of the captains we're going to have, they're going to make a lot of mistakes. They don't want to hold their teammates accountable. They don't know how to lead, and we put so many expectations and so much on their shoulders. I think as coaches, we got to do a little bit better of job of reading the room. We've got to do a little bit better job of knowing our athletes and connecting with them so we can have personalized talk or individual talks with them and know them personally, so that we're not just painting by numbers or just, taking the shotgun approach, or this is how it should be. Well, maybe it should be that way, but it's not. So how are you adjusting as a coach to figure out how to reach and inspire every one of your athletes?
Yeah. We talk about, going with them to the deep end. Like when, and that's not just with skill. Like coaches try to do a great job of that with skill. We're going to build these skills. We're going to start with left hand dribble, go to right hand dribble, build a crossover. That's what coaches think. And it's really about applying that to everything, right? So we want to go with you to the deep end. Now the shallow end is essentially like music, what you like to do, what you like to eat, the stuff that everybody just kind of talks about on the surface level. The deeper stuff is, why do you like to eat that? Why do you like to go there? Why do you think the way you do? What parents do you like? What parent do you like the most? Why do you like them the most? Who inspires you the most? And being a person who understands that, you talk about building trust. When you teach a child to swim, you always start out in the shallow end. You go with them, you kind of get them to blow bubbles, they pat their feet in their hands. And then eventually as you progress, you end up traveling towards the deep end with them, swimming beside them. And then eventually you let them go. I think this leadership journey for most people, players, coaches included, executives, is really like that. We've got to start off at a foundational level, build some trust with ourselves, build some trust with people around us, and then go with the people that we're leading to the deep end. And it's a beautiful thing when that happens. When you're going with them to the deep end, there's a level of vulnerability that happens right when they kind of see that 5 foot mark on the side. Like my child will say, "Daddy, we're going to the deep end." And like, yeah, we're going to be fine. But that question and that response in that moment, that affirmation is important to be able to have to get the response that you're hoping for on the other end as they're continuing to try to progress. And so we just say, you want to get as many people on your team going with you to the deep end, not dragging them to the deep end, not pulling them like an alligator out into the ocean. None of that. We want to go with them to the deep end. We want to experience that. It's a beautiful thing in leadership and learning to be able to do that with people.
Yeah. How can you help others is what we should always be thinking as leaders. How can we make others better? It's not about how can they make me better? How can even they make the team better? How can I make them better so that ultimately we all succeed and ultimately we're all better because I'm filling in the gaps that you have. You can do what I can't do. I can do what you can't do. We're working with each other and trying to make everybody better. And when everybody gets on the same page of, hey, how can I make so-and-so better? It's not about me. It's always about, this bigger picture. It's not about my tree. It's about the whole forest. And, C.S. Lewis had this quote, or at least he's the one that I know this quote from, but he says, humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. So you're not thinking, oh, I'm terrible, I'm no good. So as a coach, you're not thinking necessarily, well, I can't do this, or I'm not a very good coach. You're just like, hey, I'm going to put this on the kids, not like we normally put it on the kids, like it's your fault. It's you screwed up. No, it's putting it on the kids in terms of how can I make them better? It's all about them.
Yeah, I love this idea of, you can be a learner, but also being a learner means taking extreme ownership, right? And if you're leading the organization, whatever the results will be, that's on you. Like, obviously I was fired in March and everyone goes, "Oh man, how are you handling that?" And it's like, but I'm a person who takes extreme ownership no matter what. So it wasn't like you look at the results and you go, "Man, this is a surprise." If you're taking extreme ownership, if you're taking extreme ownership all the time, you're taking those deposits all the time in the good and the bad, then you're going to be ready to pivot whenever you need to pivot and make a decision on whatever you need to make a decision on. And I think, it's interesting. Sometimes we live in the should world instead of the reality of where we are. And I think if you're a leader who can learn how to live in the reality of where you are with the still intention of pushing things forward, right? It doesn't matter where we are today. It doesn't mean we're going to be there tomorrow, but we don't have to take 1,000 steps today. We just got to take one small step today. And sometimes you take that small step and it might feel like a step back, but really you're learning what you need to learn so you can go on to be the person, the leader that you need to be. And it's just really about being able to have that perspective and not being so negative on your experience.
Yeah. And you've got to constantly be a learner. The leaders are learners type thing. And whether it's learning from your mistakes or learning from the people, your quote unquote subordinates, learning from your athletes, for the coaches listening to this, talking with them, just because you have a great, and it could be as simple as just because you have a great 3-point shooter doesn't mean they feel comfortable in every single situation shooting the three. Maybe they don't like to flare or fade off of a screen and catch it that way. Or maybe they don't like to pivot off of their left foot or off of the left side into a shot. Maybe they do best on, a certain way of catching the ball, but we just pigeonhole people, or we never get to know them well enough, or we never think about this stuff. Maybe you've got a kid that's an awesome free throw shooter for 30, 35, 36, 37 minutes of a game, but man, they do not want to be at the line the last 2 or 3 minutes of the game, but we put the ball in their hand, have them drive to the basket because maybe they'll get fouled. Well, that's like a missed shot because they're scared to death. So we either haven't prepared them for stress, or we don't know that they don't react well to that anxiety or that stressful situation. So sometimes we don't learn about our athletes, and we certainly don't learn about, athlete 5, 6, 7, 8, and definitely don't learn about athlete 13, 14, 15 sometimes. The people down there, their best friend is the athletic trainer in the water cooler. We don't learn about them sometimes, what their hopes and dreams are, what their fears are, what makes them tick, how they like to be coached. We don't learn. And so we're not as good of leaders as we should be.
Yeah. It's funny. I've had so many coaches, when you're out, you gain so much more perspective. Coaches call. I probably talk to 25 to 30 coaches a week now about their teams. And when they're struggling, whatever's going on this season, normal team stuff, I always say, well, did you meet with the top 4 guys? And they're like, oh yeah, I meet with them. I talk about all the time. So did you meet with the bottom 4 guys? Right. And they're like, well, why would I do that? And I was like, well, because they have a better perspective. They're not going to be quite where you are, where you're away from it a bit. They're not playing. So they're just watching, but they're hearing everything that's going on in the locker room. And they're going to tell you the truth because they want to win no matter what. There's no agenda to those guys. They're practicing every day and not playing. They want to win. So if you want to get a good feel for your team, talk to both groups and ask the same questions and see what comes back.
Well, and how many times as coaches, we might say how you do anything is how you do everything. Yeah. We'll tell that to our players, but then we won't treat the 14th and 15th guy the same as we treat our starters. Well, that's a habit. For us, we're really good as coaches of setting a standard, but we're not really good at being the standard. Sometimes we're not the role model that we should be. We tell others what to do. We tell them, hey, we need team. But then do we point out the kid that set that great screen at the end of the game for, to hit, Steph Curry hits that game-winning shot. Well, are we talking about Steph Curry right after the game? Or are we talking about, Draymond Green setting the screen or Kevin Looney setting the screen or whatever? Oftentimes our actions don't match our words. So we're talking about the team, or we're talking about everybody's valuable, but then we don't treat everybody as valuable, and we don't treat the team, every single role, as being as valuable and significant. And people catch on to that. They see that. And then they start to think, oh, Coach Bechler, he's kind of fake. Coach Bechler, he only cares about if you're playing. We got to do a better job of being the standard, not just setting it, not just telling people what they should do, but actually doing it ourselves and living that out.
Yeah. What, I'm going to transition into some college or pro sports right now. Just get your take on a few things. What team are you watching right now that you're most curious about? There's going to be 2 questions that you're most curious about. And then what team are you watching that inspires you to learn more about? Hopefully they're 2 different teams.
I'm always, always, always curious about the Golden State Warriors.
Okay.
I'm always curious about them because I'd love to be a fly on the wall and kind of see, because from an outsider's viewpoint, Draymond Green is a interesting case study with him, I think. And so I would love to be a fly on the wall consistently and see how Coach Steve Kerr leads that team. What's going on behind the scenes? How are they dealing with the things? Because it's not all rainbows and butterflies with the Golden State Warriors, but it doesn't tear them apart like it would tear other teams apart. I'll tell you one that the Toronto Raptors, if people aren't as familiar with them, they're not as good as they were right now. They're not, obviously aren't as good as they were when they were world champions. But when they won the world championship in the few years leading up to them, I think it would be good for some people to go back and just kind of think about that team, because you think, well, yeah, Kawhi Leonard came in and they won a championship. But even that year, and then the years leading up to it before Kawhi got there, Dwayne Casey, the coach, and then Nick Nurse, who replaced Dwayne Casey, continued with this same kind of philosophy. But that was a program that everybody was significant. Everybody was valued in that program. The starters played the least amount of minutes of any starting unit. The reserves played more minutes than other reserves because they understood that, hey, Kyle Lowry can't play all these minutes. He's going to get hurt at some point. He's going to get in foul trouble at some point. Fred VanVleet and DeLon Wright have to be ready. And so we have to do this during the regular season. We can't just wait for the playoffs and then just, say, well, we're going to go to battle with our top guys. They knew that they were going to have a bench in order to beat the Golden State Warriors or in order to beat whoever. And so they approached that, every game, it seemed like they were approaching it. Their whole organization was, we're in this together. It's not about DeMar DeRozan. It's not about Kyle Lowry. It's not about Kawhi Leonard eventually. It's not about the one star, even though obviously Kawhi Leonard can elevate your team. But it was about the DeLon Wrights. It was about the Pascal Siakams before he was Pascal Siakam. It was about the Fred VanVleet before he's Fred VanVleet that we know him as today. These guys were role players, but they got so many minutes in crucial times. Both Dwayne Casey and Nick Nurse were letting those guys play. And so that doesn't answer your question in terms of now. I still like watching the Raptors now.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing. I think the Warriors are always such a, like you said, they're interesting because of Draymond. He sort of makes it great TV. But I think the ability of, the consistency of guys like Clay and Curry, maybe their demeanor makes it where it doesn't waver as much as it appears to be for us on the outside. He also gives them a fight that I think they recognize that they probably need. I love the Toronto Raptors answer. I'm really always fascinated with them. Like if I had a team I could go and spend an off season with, it would probably be them. Their scouting is excellent. You're talking about Siakam, who's an all-star. I watched him play in college. I didn't think he'd be an all-star. I thought he'd be a really good player in the NBA. Their scouting and then their ability to develop, you talk about Fred VanVleet, who was not drafted. I mean, I remember going and watching him play in high school, watch him at an AAU game. I came back, told our staff, I said, we're not getting him. I mean, he was, 5'10", 5'11", but he was just high motor, able to get his shot off. And I was like, I think Illinois should be jumping in on him. He ended up going to Wichita State. I don't know if Illinois was a choice for him. But he's been able to take his game that he's had since, I saw him play in high school. He got bigger, stronger, obviously, and he's better. But, that motor that he was able to play with at that time, he still plays with. And so that's a tremendous job by Toronto, being able to add guys like that to get that kind of value. You just don't see that in the NBA a ton.
Yeah, and you don't. And certainly it's hard to maintain that, and they've struggled. They're still good. They're just not where they were at. But that started with Dwayne Casey. Yeah. And he built that culture. And then Nick Nurse just took the reins from Dwayne Casey and continued that for a few years. But, but that started with utilizing their G League team.
Yeah.
Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam, their rookie year, they essentially played only half the games in the NBA. I mean, they split time.
Yep.
And they developed almost like a farm club, but they also said, you know what? Dwayne Casey started it with going to Kyle Lowry, and Kyle Lowry had a reputation for being a malcontent. That's probably too hard.
Yeah, he was almost out of the NBA.
Yeah, he had a reputation for not being for being a difficult player to coach, and Dwayne Casey and him got along great. And part of that was Dwayne Casey had coached Gary Payton. He had coached Jason Kidd. He had coached some guys that I don't want to say are difficult to coach, but some guys that have definitely strong personalities as point guards. And so he was able to learn from coaching those guys, and he was able to connect with Kyle Lowry. And so when you're asking a Kyle Lowry to maybe take on a slightly lesser role or play a few less minutes so DeLon Wright and Fred VanVleet can get some more minutes, well, if you don't have that connection with him, then there's no way Kyle Lowry says, okay, yeah, I'll play less minutes, because less minutes equals sometimes less money in the NBA or less endorsements. And so, Dwayne Casey didn't get to see the fruits of his labors in terms of winning the championship, but he was coach of the year in his last year. But that same mentality and that same culture, DeMar DeRozan, one thing that people forget is DeMar DeRozan was benched in a crucial game in the playoffs, and he didn't come out in the media afterwards and say, oh, Dwayne Casey's a terrible coach, I don't understand what coach is doing. No, he said coach made the decision that's right for the team, and I respect that. Well, that's because DeMar DeRozan and Dwayne Casey had a strong connection. Greg Popovich could dog cuss out Tim Duncan, and Tim Duncan took it, not because Tim Duncan is an amazing person and not because Greg Popovich was smiling all the time. It's because they had a connection that they had built up away from that time. There was deposits being, put in that emotional bank account before Greg Popovich ever needed it. And so when he and Tim Duncan are going at it, Tim Duncan knows that, hey man, this guy still loves me. This guy loves me because he's poured into me all these other times. And that goes back to what we talked about earlier. And so Dwayne Casey was building up a program where we all were looking out for one another. And then Nick Nurse kept that going. And so the Toronto, and there's other teams that do that as well. There's some other teams, but that was one that I know of, having worked with them a little bit in leadership and spent some time with them. I got to see it up close. And so it was real to me. And so I always love plugging the Raptors whenever I can, because they ended up winning a championship because of it.
Yeah, I love it. Well, you've been so gracious with your time here. We always finish up our pod with a question, and the name of the pod is called Last Call. It's the end of the night. I don't know if you drink beer or maybe wine, maybe, but it's the end of the night. The bartender said, last call. You've had a long night. You got two people beside you. On your left side, you got someone who's retired. On your right side, you got someone that's still working and active. No family. Who's on your left side? Who's on your right?
One of them has to be a designated driver, right?
No. We got you Uber. Don't worry, we got you Uber.
We got Uber. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the retired one, for me, I think I got it. Well, it's a tough one because you'd want him to be alive. My first thought was John Wooden. That's always my go-to.
You know what John Wooden?
Just any of his wisdom, he had such a great impact on me as a young coach, the way that he did things. And I had the fortune of interviewing him for my senior research project when I was in college. He actually called my dorm room out of the blue. I sent him a letter and he called my dorm room one day and we talked. That was pretty surreal. But I love John Wooden. Love him to be on one side of me though. But the current coach, I have two. I'm sorry. They can sit on each other's lap. Let's do that. They'll share a bar stool. Tom Izzo and John Calipari. And Tom Izzo, I just think he's a down-to-earth guy. I think he's a guy, and I've never met the guy. I've never talked to the guy. But I just feel like he's almost like a man of the people. He's from Upper Peninsula, Michigan, this small mining town. He's been kind of a blue collar guy, work ethic guy. The players that he's brought in aren't always the 5-star kids that you think of. He just seems like a down to earth guy that would be fun, have lots of stories, and wouldn't put on airs, wouldn't be always looking around to be like, all right, who's better that I could talk to? Like you've been at Final Fours, Coach.
For sure.
You've been at Final Fours. I'm talking to you, but while I'm talking to you, I'm looking over your shoulder. Who's more important that I can be talking to right now? He doesn't seem like he would be that kind of guy. And then John Calipari, because I think obviously he's struggled a little bit the last couple of years of where the expectations are, but he also seems like a guy that could sell ice to an Eskimo. He sounds like a guy. He seems like a guy that would be fun to be around. But also, I'd love to pick his brain. I'd love to pick his brain about the way that he's gone about coaching. The last decade or so of how he's getting these big time 5-star kids. So the opposite of Tom Izzo. How he's coaching up the kids that are the opposite of the kids Tom Izzo's bringing up. And for the most part, how he's getting them to come together, even though they have a lot of ego, all their goals are to be in the NBA. And certainly there's some big Blue Nation people out there right now, rolling their eyes and, throwing stuff at their phone or their video, their computer screen, being like, you're an idiot for wanting to talk to that guy. He hasn't won a national championship lately. But I think it's hard to win a national championship, and I'd love to just talk to him about how he's going about the way that he leads and the way that he coaches up his guys.
I love it. Jamie, thank you for your time. Where can we find you at?
Yeah, if you're a twit, go to @Coach Bechler. I'm on Twitter all the time. So @Coach Bechler. CoachBechler.com is where you can find all of our books, all of our programs, all of my insights, blog articles, all that kind of jazz. So if you want to check that out, CoachBechler.com is where you can find all the stuff. But I appreciate the conversation. Appreciate you having me on. I was quite honored to be on your show.
I appreciate it. Jamie, you've been an awesome guest. Success is a choice. We appreciate you having us.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on The Last Call, powered by Speakeasy, where careers grow through relationships and relationships grow through Speakeasy. We hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to connecting with you soon.